I never thought my own sister would try to kill me in a hospital room. There I was lying in the ICU bed with tubes running into my chest, recovering from emergency lung surgery after my climbing accident 3 days earlier. The pneumothorax had collapsed my left lung completely, and every breath still felt like drowning in reverse. Jessica stormed through the door like a hurricane, her heels clicking against the sterile floor with military precision. Her face twisted with that familiar expression of disgust she reserved specifically for me. My parents shuffled in behind her, their eyes avoiding mine as usual. Without warning, Jessica grabbed the oxygen tube feeding precious air into my damaged lungs and yanked it clean out. The plastic connector hit the floor with a hollow clatter that echoed through the suddenly silent room. I gasped, my vision blurring as panic flooded my chest. She leaned over me, her voice dripping with venom as she hissed those words that would haunt me forever. "Stop faking it, Tucker. You just want pity." My parents stood there like statues, saying absolutely nothing as I struggled to breathe, my hands clawing at empty air. What none of them realized was that Dr. Harrison, my thoracic surgeon, stood frozen in the doorway behind them, his clipboard clattering to the ground as he witnessed everything. The world went black for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. When consciousness crept back, the room exploded with activity. Nurses rushed past my family members, pushing them aside like obstacles as they worked to reattach my oxygen supply. The familiar hiss of the machine returned, and sweet relief flooded my burning lungs. Dr. Harrison moved with controlled urgency, his usually calm demeanor replaced by something much more intense. "Everyone out, now!" His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but the steel in his eyes silenced her immediately. My parents shuffled toward the exit, their faces pale, with what I hoped was understanding of what had just happened. Jessica lingered, her expression shifting from defiance to something resembling fear as Dr. Harrison stared her down. I said, "Everyone." The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Dr. Harrison immediately began examining me, his hands gentle but thorough, as he checked my breathing and pulse. The monitoring equipment beeped erratically, reflecting the chaos Jessica had just unleashed in my already fragile respiratory system. "Tucker, I need you to stay calm while I examine you. What your sister just did..." He paused, his jaw tightening. "We need to make sure she didn't cause additional damage." As he worked, the full weight of the past few days crashed over me like a tidal wave. The climbing accident hadn't been some reckless adventure gone wrong. I had driven up to Eagles Peak alone, desperate to escape the suffocating toxicity that had become my daily existence. 3 weeks earlier, I had discovered something that shattered my remaining faith in my family. While helping Grandpa Harold organize his financial documents, I had noticed irregularities in his care fund statements. Numbers didn't add up. Payments to facilities he had never used, charges for equipment never delivered. The trail led directly to Jessica. My sister, the golden child, who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, had been systematically stealing from our elderly grandfather. Not just small amounts either. Over 18 months, she had embezzled nearly $80,000 from the account set up to ensure Harold's comfortable retirement. When I confronted her about it, she didn't deny it. Instead, she threatened me. "Who do you think Mom and Dad will believe, Tucker? Their successful daughter, or their perpetually struggling son who can barely keep his own life together?" She was right, and we both knew it. I had always been the problem child in their narrative. Too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic. Jessica was their pride and joy, the daughter who had never given them a moment's worry. She had manipulated every family dynamic since childhood, positioning herself as the responsible one while painting me as unstable and unreliable. The climbing trip was supposed to clear my head, help me figure out how to handle the situation, without destroying what little remained of our family bonds. Instead, a sudden weather shift had caught me off guard. Strong winds and loose rock combined into a perfect storm of disaster. My anchor point failed during a routine descent, and I plummeted 30 feet before my backup line caught. The impact drove my ribs into my lung, causing the pneumothorax that landed me in this sterile white room. Dr. Harrison finished his examination and moved to update my chart. His expression remained grim as he documented everything that had just occurred. "Tucker, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Has your sister ever done anything like this before?" The question hung in the air, like smoke. How could I explain 28 years of Jessica's subtle cruelties, the way she had always known exactly which emotional buttons to push, how she could make me feel worthless with just a look or a carefully chosen word, how she had convinced our parents that my emotional responses to her attacks were evidence of my instability rather than natural reactions to psychological abuse. "Not exactly like this," I said finally. "But she's never been particularly concerned with my well-being." Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, making additional notes. "I'm documenting everything that happened here today. The removal of your oxygen tube caused your lung to partially collapse again. We caught it in time, but another few minutes." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The door opened softly, and Jessica peered inside her face, now arranged into an expression of concern that might have fooled someone who didn't know her. Tears glistened in her eyes as she approached my bedside, her voice taking on that wounded tone she used whenever she needed to play the victim. "Tucker, I'm so sorry. I was just scared, seeing you like this with all these machines. I guess I panicked. I didn't understand how serious everything was." My parents nodded sympathetically from the doorway, completely buying her performance. They had always been eager to accept Jessica's explanations for her behavior, no matter how implausible. It was easier than acknowledging that their perfect daughter might be capable of deliberate cruelty. "I would never hurt you on purpose. You know that, right?" Dr. Harrison watched this entire exchange with the focused attention of someone cataloging evidence. When Jessica finished her tearful apology, he cleared his throat softly. "Miss Patterson, I'll need to speak with you and your parents about some changes to Tucker's care plan. There are protocols we need to discuss." Jessica's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating intelligence that lurked beneath her tearful facade. She recovered quickly, but Dr. Harrison had seen it too. As my family filed out for their conference, he leaned closer to my bed. "Sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, Tucker. Medical records don't lie, and neither does security footage. Recovery should have been straightforward. Follow the medication schedule, gradually increase activity levels, attend physical therapy sessions to rebuild lung capacity. Instead, my healing process became a battlefield, where Jessica fought to maintain control of the family narrative. Every day brought new confrontations disguised as loving concern. She orchestrated what she called an intervention 48 hours after the oxygen incident. My parents arrived carrying folded chairs and grim expressions settling into formation around my hospital bed like a tribunal. Jessica positioned herself as the spokesperson, her voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. "Tucker, we need to talk about some things that have been worrying us for a long time." My mother fidgeted with her purse strap, avoiding eye contact as she spoke. "Sweetheart, you've always been so sensitive. Even as a little boy, you would get upset over the smallest things. We've been thinking that maybe this accident and your behavior since then." She trailed off, leaving Jessica to finish the thought with surgical precision. "We think you might be making your injuries seem worse than they really are. The doctors said you're healing well, but you keep acting like you're dying. It's concerning." My father finally looked directly at me, his expression distant and cold. "Son, your mother and I have been discussing some things. We've always known you had a tendency toward drama, but this situation has opened our eyes to how severe the problem has become." The words hit like physical blows. They had actually convinced themselves that I was exaggerating my medical condition for attention. Jessica had spent months planting seeds of doubt about my mental stability, and now she was harvesting the results. "We've made an appointment with Dr. Peterson for next week," my mother added quietly. "He specializes in situations like this." "Situations like what I managed to ask?" Jessica leaned forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when explaining obvious things to slow children. "Factitious disorder, Tucker. When people fake or exaggerate illnesses for psychological reasons. Dr. Peterson can help you understand why you feel the need to manipulate people this way." The room spun as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. They weren't just doubting my physical condition, they were questioning my fundamental honesty and mental stability. Jessica had successfully convinced them that my documented medical emergency was somehow my own elaborate performance. "You've been intercepting my mail?" I realized suddenly. "The insurance statements, the medical bills. How else would you know what the doctors have been saying?" Jessica's smile never wavered. "I've been trying to help you manage things while you recover. You're obviously not thinking clearly right now." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Tucker, we've been supporting Jessica financially while you've been in school. She's proven she can handle responsibility. You've always struggled with money management." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. While I had worked multiple jobs and taken out crushing student loans to pay for medical school, they had been funding Jessica's comfortable lifestyle. She had never needed to steal from Grandpa Harold. She had done it purely because she could. The embezzlement was about power and control, not financial necessity. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. A woman in professional attire entered, introducing herself as Mrs. Chen from Hospital Social Services. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Mr. Patterson, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I wanted to check in and see how you're adjusting to your recovery process." My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this unexpected intrusion. Jessica, however, saw an opportunity. "Actually, we were just discussing our concerns about Tucker's emotional state. He's been very dramatic about his condition, and we're worried he might be seeking attention in unhealthy ways." Mrs. Chen listened politely, making notes on her tablet. When Jessica finished, the social worker turned to me with a direct gaze. "Mr. Patterson, how are you feeling about your family's support during this difficult time?" The question was loaded with implications. Mrs. Chen had obviously witnessed similar family dynamics before and recognized the warning signs. I caught a glimpse of hope in her professional demeanor. "They've been very involved in my care decisions," I said carefully. Mrs. Chen nodded, making additional notes. Before leaving, she handed me a business card with her direct number. "Sometimes families need time to adjust to medical crises. If you have any concerns about your care or need someone to talk through your options, please don't hesitate to reach out." After she left, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jessica's mask had completely disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. "I hope you're not planning to involve outsiders in private family matters, Tucker. That would be very disappointing." Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, an expression carefully neutral. He had been documenting Jessica's increasingly erratic behavior for days, noting her attempts to access my medical files without authorization and her efforts to convince nursing staff that I was delusional about my pain levels. "I need to discuss some test results with Tucker privately," he announced. "Family members can wait in the consultation room down the hall." As my parents gathered their belongings, I caught fragments of their whispered conversation in the hallway. "Always been manipulative. You can't trust anything he says anymore. Why, need to protect our assets if he's really this unstable." The words cut deeper than any physical injury. 28 years of family history rewritten to cast me as the villain in Jessica's carefully constructed narrative. Dr. Harrison waited until their voices faded before closing the door and pulling up a chair beside my bed. "Tucker, I need you to know that everything your sister has done in this hospital has been documented. The security footage, the unauthorized attempts to access your records, the interference with your treatment. If you decide to pursue legal action, you'll have evidence." He paused, studying my face carefully. "But there's something else you should know. Medical abuse cases sometimes surface years later during estate proceedings or legal disputes. Family members who endanger patients often have broader patterns of manipulation that eventually come to light." Grandpa Harold's arrival at the hospital 3 days later felt like a thunderclap in the sterile quiet of my recovery room. At 79 years old, he still moved with the purposeful stride of the construction foreman he had been for 40 years. His weathered hands carried a bouquet of sunflowers from his garden and a thermos of the coffee he brewed strong enough to wake the dead. Unlike every other family member who had visited, Harold took one look at my condition and immediately understood the severity of the situation. His face darkened as he absorbed the sight of the chest tubes, the monitors, the careful way I had to position myself to breathe without pain. "Jesus Christ, Tucker, those idiots downstairs were acting like you had a head cold." He settled into the visitor chair with a heaviness that seemed to encompass more than just his physical weight. His pale blue eyes, still sharp as broken glass, despite his age, studied my face with an intensity that made me want to confess everything. "Tell me what really happened on that mountain." So I did. The whole story poured out of me like water from a broken dam. The embezzlement discovery, Jessica's threats, the desperate need to escape and think clearly, the accident that had nearly killed me. Harold listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When I finished, he sat in silence for several minutes, staring out the window at the parking lot where normal families visited their loved ones, without ulterior motives. "Tucker, there's something you need to know. I've been aware of Jessica's theft for 3 months." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? But why didn't you—" "Because I hired a private investigator after noticing the discrepancies. I've been testing everyone, waiting to see if anyone in this family had enough integrity to do the right thing." Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. Bank statements, surveillance photos, recorded phone conversations. Evidence of Jessica's systematic theft laid out in chronological order, like a timeline of betrayal. "You were the only one who tried to protect me, son. Your parents have been so busy enabling Jessica's behavior that they never bothered to check on my actual well-being. Your sister has been drugging my evening tea with mild sedatives to make me appear confused during financial meetings." The revelation made my chest tighten beyond what the lung injury could account for. "Harold, I had no idea it was that extensive. She's been positioning herself as my primary caregiver, convincing your parents that I'm developing dementia. Meanwhile, she's been systematically looting everything I've worked my entire life to build." Harold opened the folder and showed me photographs taken by his investigator. Jessica entering Harold's house with her own key. Screenshots of email conversations where she discussed my mental instability with financial advisors. Audio recordings of phone calls where she convinced medical professionals that Harold was too confused to make his own healthcare decisions. But here's the part that's going to interest you most, Tucker. She's been planning this character assassination campaign against you for over a year. He pulled out printed emails that made my blood run cold. Messages between Jessica and my parents discussing my dramatic tendencies and attention-seeking behavior. Detailed strategies for undermining my credibility in case I ever discovered her crimes. She knew eventually someone would notice the missing money. She's been building a narrative that you're mentally unstable and vindictive, so that if you ever accused her of anything, the family would automatically dismiss your claims as delusions. The scope of Jessica's manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. She hadn't just stolen money, she had systematically destroyed my reputation and relationships as insurance against exposure. Every family interaction for the past year had been shaped by her lies about my character. "Harold, what are we going to do?" My grandfather's expression hardened into something resembling granite. We're going to let her dig her own grave a little deeper. I've been restructuring my estate with my attorney for weeks. Jessica thinks she's going to inherit the bulk of my assets because she's convinced everyone she's my devoted caregiver. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. What she doesn't know is that I've documented every instance of theft, every manipulation, every lie. My will reading is scheduled for next Tuesday. She's going to get the surprise of her lifetime. Harold's plan was more comprehensive than I had imagined. He had been working with FBI financial crimes investigators due to the scope of Jessica's theft, which extended beyond his personal accounts to charity organizations she managed through her financial planning business. Dr. Harrison and I have been in contact, Harold continued. He's provided medical documentation of Jessica's interference with your care and the dangerous situation she created by removing your oxygen tube. That incident is going to be Exhibit A in a criminal case. Relief washed over me like cool water on burning skin. For the first time in years, someone was taking Jessica's behavior seriously instead of making excuses for it. Someone was finally seeing through her carefully constructed facade to the calculating manipulator beneath. But Tucker, I need you to understand something. Things are going to get much worse before they get better. Jessica is going to become increasingly desperate as she realizes her schemes are unraveling. Desperate people do dangerous things. Harold's warning proved prophetic within hours. As visiting hours ended and he prepared to leave, Jessica appeared in my doorway, with an expression I had never seen before. Gone was the tearful concern or patronizing superiority. This was cold rage, barely contained beneath a veneer of family obligation. I see Grandpa has been filling your head with more dramatic stories, Tucker. I hope you're not encouraging his confusion by agreeing with his paranoid fantasies. Harold stood slowly, his full height still impressive despite his age. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded construction crews and raised families. Jessica, the only confusion here is your belief that you're smart enough to fool everyone forever. She started to respond, but Harold cut her off with a gesture that brooked no argument. Next Tuesday, everything becomes clear. I suggest you use the time between now and then to consider whether you want to make this situation worse by continuing your lies. After they left, the room felt charged with electricity. I could sense that wheels were already in motion, that Jessica's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. But Harold's warning echoed in my mind. She would fight back, and she would fight dirty. I had no idea how dirty until the next morning brought a visitor I wasn't expecting. Nathan Rodriguez had been Jessica's boyfriend for 8 months, though I had only met him twice at family gatherings. He was the kind of man Jessica typically chose, successful, well-dressed, and charmed by her carefully crafted public persona. What I hadn't expected was to find him standing in my hospital doorway at 6:30 in the morning, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Tucker, I need to talk to you. It's about Jessica." His voice carried an urgency that made my already damaged chest feel even tighter. Nathan glanced nervously down the hallway before entering my room and closing the door behind him. "She doesn't know I'm here. If she found out..." He shook his head, running his hands through his usually perfectly styled hair. "I thought I knew her. I thought what you guys had was just normal family dysfunction. But yesterday I heard her on a phone call that changed everything." Nathan pulled out his cell phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through audio files with the focused intensity of someone whose world had just shifted on its axis. "She's been planning to have you declared mentally incompetent. Not just getting you psychiatric evaluation. Full involuntary commitment to a long-term facility." The words hit me like a physical assault. I had known Jessica was manipulative, but the scope of her latest scheme defied belief even by her standards. She's been researching legal procedures for weeks, gathering affidavits from your parents claiming you've been having psychotic episodes and violent outbursts. She's built an entire fictional medical history, including claims that your climbing accident was actually a suicide attempt. Nathan's hands shook as he played the recording. Jessica's voice filled the room cold and calculating as she discussed timeline and logistics with someone I didn't recognize. It needs to happen before the will reading. Once Tucker is committed, I'll have power of attorney to handle his affairs. The grandfather's getting suspicious, but if Tucker is declared incompetent, his testimony becomes worthless. My vision blurred as the full scope of her plan became clear. She wasn't just trying to discredit me. She was attempting to legally erase my existence as a functioning adult. If she succeeded, I would be trapped in a psychiatric facility, while she consolidated control over Harold's assets and destroyed any evidence of her crimes. "Nathan, why are you telling me this?" He looked up from his phone, his expression haunted. "Because yesterday I also discovered that she's been planning to leave the country. Plane tickets to a non-extradition nation purchased under a false identity. She's been moving money into offshore accounts for months." The room spun as pieces clicked together. Jessica's commitment scheme wasn't just about silencing me. It was about buying herself time to disappear completely. Once I was locked away and Harold's money was transferred to accounts she controlled, she would vanish, leaving her victims with no recourse. "There's more," Nathan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's been researching ways to make psychiatric commitment permanent. Medications that can cause actual mental impairment. She's talked to people who work in the facility she's targeting." The horror of her plan was breathtaking in its thoroughness. Jessica hadn't just decided to frame me for mental illness. She intended to actually cause the condition she was claiming I already had. "I've been documenting everything for the past week. Phone calls, text messages, meetings with people I didn't recognize. I was going to confront her about the money stuff, but then I realized she might be dangerous." Nathan showed me additional recordings and photographs. Jessica meeting with men in expensive suits who looked like lawyers or financial advisors. Conversations about eliminating liability and ensuring permanent solutions. Screenshots of research into psychiatric medications and their long-term effects. She scheduled the commitment hearing for Monday morning, the day before your grandfather's will reading. If she can get you declared incompetent, she believes she can contest the will on grounds that Harold was influenced by someone who isn't mentally stable. My chest tightened beyond what my lung injury could account for. Jessica's scheme was more sophisticated than anything I had imagined her capable of planning. She had spent months building this elaborate trap, using my family's willingness to believe her lies as the foundation for a criminal conspiracy. "Nathan, you have to take this to the police." He nodded grimly. "I already have. Federal agents are involved because of the financial crimes, but they want to catch her in the act. They think if they arrest her too early, she might have accomplices who could destroy evidence or continue her schemes." The idea that Jessica might not be working alone sent ice water through my veins. How many other families had she targeted? How many other vulnerable people had fallen victim to her manipulation? "There's something else you need to know," Nathan continued. "She's been in contact with people at the psychiatric facility. She's paid them to ensure your treatment includes experimental medications that could cause permanent cognitive damage." The casual way he delivered this information made it even more terrifying. Jessica had moved beyond simple theft and manipulation into territory that resembled organized crime. She was willing to permanently destroy my mind to protect her financial schemes. The FBI wants to let her proceed with the commitment hearing because they believe it will provide evidence for additional criminal charges. But Tucker, you need to understand that you'll be in real danger until they can arrest her. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text message. His face went pale as he read it. "She's coming here. She doesn't know I warned you, but she's suspicious about my behavior lately. I have to go before she sees my car in the parking lot." He stood quickly gathering his belongings with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to covering his tracks. "The agents have surveillance on her, but they can't protect you 24 hours a day. Be careful, Tucker. She's not the person any of us thought she was." After Nathan left, the hospital room felt like a trap waiting to spring closed. Every footstep in the hallway made my heart race. Every voice that wasn't immediately recognizable sent adrenaline coursing through my already damaged system. Jessica's latest scheme wasn't just about money or control. It was about my complete destruction as a human being. When she appeared in my doorway 20 minutes later, her smile was perfectly calibrated to suggest loving concern. But now I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the cold assessment of obstacles to be removed. "Good morning, sweetheart. You're looking much better today." She settled into the visitor chair with the casual confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. As she chatted about meaningless topics, I watched her hands, her eyes, her posture for any sign of the monster Nathan had revealed. "I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday, about getting you some professional help for the stress you've been under." Her voice maintained that patronizing tone she used when discussing my supposed mental fragility, but now I could hear the underlying threat. "I've found a wonderful facility that specializes in cases like yours. Very private, very discreet. You could focus on healing without all the distractions and pressures of normal life." The facility Nathan had warned me about. The place where Jessica had arranged for my systematic destruction through chemical lobotomy disguised as medical treatment. "That's very thoughtful of you, Jessica." She smiled brightly, apparently pleased by my docile response. What she didn't know was that Dr. Harrison had already been contacted by federal agents. Hospital security was reviewing footage of her unauthorized attempts to access my medical records. Her phone calls were being monitored. Her financial accounts were being traced. The commitment hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. Just a formality, really, to make sure you get the help you need. Jessica leaned forward, her expression shifting to something resembling genuine concern. "I know you think I don't care about you, Tucker, but everything I'm doing is because I love you. This family has enabled your dramatic behavior for too long. Sometimes tough love is the only way to help people see reality." The twisted logic of her justification was almost impressive. She had convinced herself that destroying my life was actually an act of sisterly devotion. In her mind, she was the hero of this story, saving the family from my supposed mental illness while coincidentally inheriting a fortune. "Monday morning will be the beginning of your real recovery, sweetheart. I promise everything will be better once you're getting proper care." As she left, Jessica paused in the doorway for one final comment that chilled me to the bone. "And don't worry about any of Grandpa's confused stories. Once you're feeling better, we'll be able to sort out what's real and what's just part of the illness." The room felt cold long after her footsteps faded down the hallway. Jessica's confidence, yes, it was terrifying in its completeness. She genuinely believed she was going to win, that her carefully constructed plan would succeed in erasing me while enriching herself. What she didn't know was that her own boyfriend had already provided law enforcement with everything they needed to destroy her. The trap she thought she was setting for me was about to spring closed around her instead. But first I had to survive until Monday. Agent Sarah Mitchell arrived at my hospital room disguised as another medical consultant, her FBI credentials hidden beneath a white coat and stethoscope. She was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of alert intelligence that missed nothing and forgot less. Dr. Harrison had coordinated her visit during shift change when Jessica was least likely to appear unexpectedly. "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to be direct with you because time is a luxury we don't have. Your sister's criminal activities extend far beyond what your family has experienced." She opened a tablet and showed me a map of the southwestern United States dotted with red pins. Each pin represented a victim of what the Bureau had designated as the Jessica Patterson Financial Exploitation Network. "We've identified 17 elderly individuals who have been targeted using variations of the same psychological manipulation tactics your sister used on your grandfather. The total theft amount exceeds $2.3 million. The scope was breathtaking. Jessica hadn't just stolen from Harold. She had developed a systematic approach to financial elder abuse that she had been perfecting for years. Each victim had been isolated from family members who might ask inconvenient questions. Each had been convinced that they were developing dementia or other cognitive issues that required Jessica's financial management services. The pattern is always the same, Agent Mitchell continued. Jessica identifies vulnerable elderly individuals with substantial assets and limited family support. She gains their trust through her financial planning business, then gradually increases their dependence on her services. The tablet showed surveillance photos of Jessica entering various homes and assisted living facilities, financial records showing systematic transfers from victim accounts to shells companies she controlled, medical records documenting unnecessary psychiatric evaluations that she had arranged for clients who questioned her management. What makes her particularly dangerous is her sophistication in psychological manipulation. She doesn't just steal money, she destroys her victims' relationships with anyone who might protect them. Agent Mitchell pulled up audio recordings of phone calls between Jessica and family members of her victims. I listened in horror as my sister used the same techniques she had perfected on our parents to convince other families that their loved ones were becoming paranoid and delusional. She's been drugging multiple victims with mild sedatives and memory-affecting medications, not enough to cause obvious harm but sufficient to create confusion that supports her narrative about their mental decline. The systematic nature of Jessica's crimes was nauseating. She had turned elder abuse into a business model refined through years of practice, into an efficient machine for financial exploitation. Your grandfather's case is unique because he suspected her activities and began documenting evidence. Most victims never realize they've been robbed until Jessica disappears with their money. Agent Mitchell showed me Harold's investigative files, which had been shared with federal authorities weeks earlier. My grandfather hadn't just been building a case against Jessica. He had been working with the FBI to gather evidence that could protect other vulnerable people. The oxygen tube incident you experienced has provided us with evidence of escalating violence. Jessica is moving beyond financial crime into territory that suggests she's willing to kill to protect her operation. The words hit me like cold water. I had known Jessica was manipulative and cruel, but the idea that she might actually commit murder felt impossible to accept. Mr. Patterson, we have recordings of phone conversations where your sister discusses permanent solutions to the problem you represent. She's been researching untraceable methods of causing fatal medical complications in hospital patients. Agent Mitchell played audio that made my blood freeze. Jessica's voice calm and businesslike, discussing how to cause lung infections that would appear natural in someone recovering from pneumothorax surgery. Conversations about medications that could trigger fatal allergic reactions. Research into ways to tamper with medical equipment without leaving evidence. She's also been in contact with people who work at the psychiatric facility where she planned to have you committed. The medications she arranged for your treatment weren't just intended to impair your cognitive function. In combination with your existing lung damage, they would likely have been fatal within months. The casual way Agent Mitchell delivered this information made it even more horrifying. Jessica hadn't just planned to destroy my mind. She had designed a slow-motion execution disguised as psychiatric treatment. Nathan Rodriguez has been working with us for the past week. His recordings and photographs have provided evidence of criminal conspiracy involving multiple individuals. Your sister isn't operating alone. The tablet displayed organizational charts showing Jessica's connections to corrupt medical professionals, financial advisors who specialized in elder abuse, and legal professionals who helped wealthy clients hide assets from family members. We've identified at least 6 other people involved in this network: doctors who provide false diagnoses, lawyers who draft fraudulent legal documents, financial advisors who help launder stolen assets through complex investment schemes. Agent Mitchell pulled up financial records showing the movement of Harold's money through multiple accounts and investment vehicles. Jessica's theft had been far more sophisticated than simple embezzlement. She had built an entire infrastructure for converting stolen assets into untraceable wealth. The commitment hearing scheduled for Monday was designed to be the final phase of Jessica's operation. Once you were declared incompetent, she would have legal authority to access your grandfather's assets as his caregiver. Her plan was to transfer everything to offshore accounts and disappear within 72 hours. The timeline was terrifyingly precise. Jessica had calculated exactly how long she needed to complete her theft and escape before law enforcement could respond to Harold's inevitable complaints. We're allowing the hearing to proceed because we want to catch her network in the act of committing additional crimes. The more evidence we can gather, the more people we can protect from future victimization. Agent Mitchell closed her tablet and looked directly at me with an expression that mixed professional determination with genuine human concern. I need you to understand that you'll be in significant danger until we can make arrests. Jessica believes she's very close to succeeding, which makes her extremely dangerous. Desperate people make fatal mistakes, but they also take desperate actions. She handed me a small device that looked like a panic button. If Jessica or anyone associated with her approaches, you in a threatening manner press this immediately. We have surveillance teams monitoring the hospital, but we can't guarantee your safety every moment. After Agent Mitchell left, the hospital room felt different somehow. The familiar medical equipment and sterile surfaces now seemed like props in a much larger drama playing out beyond these walls. Jessica's crimes extended far beyond our family dysfunction into territory that resembled organized crime. But there was also hope for the first time in months. Law enforcement understood the scope of Jessica's manipulation. They had evidence of her crimes. Most importantly, they were committed to stopping her before she could hurt anyone else. The commitment hearing on Monday would be Jessica's moment of triumph or her final mistake. Either way, the truth was finally going to emerge from behind the lies she had been telling for years. I just had to survive until then. Harold's attorney, Charles Brennan, had been practicing estate law for 37 years. His office reflected that experience in dark wood furniture, leather-bound legal volumes, and the kind of quiet dignity that came from helping families navigate their most difficult transitions. Under normal circumstances, will readings were somber affairs marked by grief and careful attention to final wishes. This was not normal circumstances. Jessica arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in conservative black that suggested respectful mourning while still flattering her figure. She carried a leather portfolio containing documents I suspected were related to her planned financial manipulation. Her confidence filled the room like expensive perfume, overwhelming and slightly toxic. My parents followed her lead, settling into their chairs, with the resigned expression of people who had already decided how everything should unfold. They avoided eye contact with me, still convinced that I represented some kind of threat to family harmony that Jessica was heroically managing. I arrived directly from the hospital, still connected to a portable oxygen monitor that beeped softly every few seconds. Dr. Harrison had cleared me for this brief excursion, despite the risks, understanding that whatever happened today would determine the course of the rest of my life. Charles Brennan called the meeting to order, with the formal precision of someone accustomed to family drama erupting during estate proceedings. We're here today to execute the final will and testament of Harold Patterson, who passed peacefully on Tuesday morning, surrounded by medical professionals who can confirm his complete mental competency at the time of death. Jessica's portfolio shifted slightly in her hands. The emphasis on Harold's mental clarity wasn't accidental. It preemptively addressed any challenges she might raise about his decision-making capacity. Harold requested that certain portions of his will be read aloud to ensure complete understanding of his intentions and reasoning. Brennan activated an audio system that filled the room with Harold's voice strong and clear despite his advanced age. If you're hearing this recording, it means I've passed on and left behind a family situation that requires careful explanation. Jessica Tucker, Michael, and Patricia, you each need to understand the decisions I've made and why I've made them. Jessica's confident expression flickered slightly. She had expected a standard reading focused on asset distribution, not a detailed explanation of Harold's reasoning. For the past 18 months, I've been documenting a pattern of theft, manipulation, and psychological abuse that has torn apart our family. Jessica, you've stolen over $80,000 from my care fund while convincing your parents that I was developing dementia. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My parents shifted uncomfortably, finally confronting evidence they couldn't dismiss or rationalize away. Tucker, you were the only family member who tried to protect me from this exploitation. When you discovered Jessica's theft, you attempted to address it privately, rather than immediately involving law enforcement. Your loyalty to family, even when that family failed to protect you, demonstrates character that I admire and want to reward. Jessica stood abruptly, her portfolio scattering papers across the polished conference table. This is ridiculous. Harold was clearly confused in his final months. Tucker has been manipulating him, probably planning this whole situation to steal the inheritance himself. Brennan raised his hand for silence while Harold's voice continued from the speakers. I know Jessica will claim that I was mentally compromised when I made these decisions. That's why I've undergone comprehensive psychiatric evaluation with 3 independent physicians. Each has certified my complete mental competency. Their reports are part of this legal record. Jessica's face flushed red as her primary challenge to the will was preemptively demolished. She had spent months building a narrative about Harold's cognitive decline, only to discover that he had been lucid enough to anticipate and counter her strategy. Furthermore, I've been working with federal law enforcement to document Jessica's financial crimes, which extend far beyond theft from my personal accounts. She has been systematically exploiting elderly victims across multiple states. My parents looked like they had been physically struck. The scope of Jessica's criminal activities was finally being revealed to people who had spent years making excuses for her behavior. Jessica, you've attempted to have Tucker declared mentally incompetent as part of a scheme to gain control over my assets before fleeing the country. You've purchased plane tickets under a false identity and moved money into offshore accounts. Harold's voice carried a sadness that made my chest tighten beyond what my medical condition could account for. Most devastating of all, you nearly killed your brother by removing his oxygen support in the hospital. Medical professionals have documented that your actions caused life-threatening complications that required emergency intervention. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of my oxygen monitor. Jessica's carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled, revealing the cold calculation beneath. The bulk of my estate will go to Tucker, along with control of the foundation I've established to support elder abuse survivors. Jessica, you will inherit exactly $1, along with my profound disappointment in the person you've chosen to become. Jessica exploded with rage that had been building for months. This is insane. Tucker has poisoned Harold against me with lies and manipulation. You can't believe this ridiculous story. Brennan pulled out additional documents from a secured filing cabinet. Miss Patterson, your grandfather also requested that certain evidence be presented if you challenged his decisions. The conference table filled with photographs, bank statements, audio recordings, and medical reports. Evidence of Jessica's systematic theft and manipulation laid out in chronological order like a timeline of betrayal. These materials have also been provided to federal law enforcement as part of an ongoing criminal investigation. Jessica's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. The confidence that had sustained her manipulation campaigns had completely evaporated, replaced by desperate panic. The conference room door opened, and Dr. Harrison entered with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing information. His presence had been specifically requested by Harold for this moment. Jessica, there's something you need to understand about what you did in that hospital room. Dr. Harrison moved to stand directly in front of Jessica's chair, his expression grave and professional. Oh, when you removed Tucker's oxygen tube, you caused his partially collapsed lung to fail completely. Another 60 seconds without intervention would have resulted in fatal respiratory failure. Jessica's face went completely white. Whatever she had expected from this confrontation, it wasn't a detailed medical explanation of how close she had come to committing murder. I've documented everything in Tucker's medical record, including your attempts to access his files without authorization and your efforts to convince medical staff that he was delusional about his condition. Dr. Harrison pulled out his own tablet displaying security footage from the hospital. Your behavior represents the most severe case of medical family abuse I've encountered in 15 years of practice. Harold's voice returned from the speakers for his final message. Dr. Harrison, if Jessica challenges anything that's been said today, please share the 6 words I asked you to speak on my behalf. Dr. Harrison looked directly at Jessica, his voice carrying the weight of medical authority and moral judgment. Jessica, you nearly killed your brother. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jessica's portfolio slipped from her trembling hands, papers scattering across the floor like evidence of a life built on lies, finally collapsing under the weight of truth. My parents sat in stunned silence, finally confronting the reality that their golden daughter was not just a thief, but someone capable of attempted murder disguised as family concern. The conference room door opened again, and 2 people in business attire entered with the purposeful stride of law enforcement officers. Jessica Patterson, you're under arrest for federal charges including elder financial abuse conspiracy to commit fraud and aggravated assault. As handcuffs clicked around Jessica's wrists, her mask finally dropped completely. The sweet concern, the tearful apologies, the patronizing explanations all disappeared, leaving only cold rage and desperate self-preservation. This isn't over, Tucker. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. But even as she made threats, I could see the fear in her eyes. Years of manipulation and control were ending in federal custody and criminal prosecution. The elaborate schemes that had seemed so sophisticated were crumbling like a house built on sand. As law enforcement led Jessica away, the conference room fell silent except for the gentle beeping of my oxygen monitor. The sound that had once represented medical crisis now seemed like a heartbeat, marking the beginning of recovery. Not just physical recovery, but the chance to finally breathe freely after years of psychological suffocation. 6 months after Jessica's arrest, I stood in Harold's garden watching sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sunflowers he had planted in spring were now towering stalks, heavy with seeds ready to begin the cycle again. My left lung had healed completely, though I would carry the scars forever. Some scars, I had learned, were worth preserving as reminders of survival. Jessica's trial had made headlines across the Southwest as federal prosecutors unveiled the scope of her financial exploitation network. 17 elderly victims testified about her manipulation tactics, painting a picture of systematic psychological abuse that shocked even experienced legal professionals. Nathan's recordings and Harold's documentation provided prosecutors with evidence that led to guilty verdicts on all charges. She received a sentence of 15 years in federal prison, with requirements for full restitution to her victims. The offshore accounts she thought would provide escape money instead became assets seized by the government and returned to the families she had destroyed. Her carefully planned flight to freedom had become a prison cell and decades of consequences. My parents underwent intensive therapy to understand their role in enabling Jessica's behavior. The process was painful for all of us, requiring honest examination of family dynamics that had been toxic for years. Mother admitted that she had projected her own insecurities onto me, making me a scapegoat for family problems, rather than addressing Jessica's actual behavior. Father acknowledged that his financial favoritism had created the environment that allowed Jessica's sense of entitlement to flourish into criminal behavior. Recovery wasn't immediate or easy. Trust, once broken by years of systematic manipulation, required careful rebuilding through consistent actions rather than promises. But gradually, we began developing relationships based on honesty rather than the lies Jessica had woven through our family interactions. Dr. Harrison became more than just my physician. He became an advocate for medical abuse awareness. My case became a teaching example in medical schools about recognizing signs of family manipulation and protecting vulnerable patients. The hospital implemented new protocols for identifying situations where family members might be endangering patient care. Harold's Foundation, now under my direction, had grown into a significant resource for elder abuse survivors. We provided legal assistance counseling services and education programs that helped vulnerable people recognize manipulation before it became systematic exploitation. Every dollar Jessica had stolen was being used to protect other families from experiencing similar betrayal. The Foundation's work brought me into contact with Sarah Chen, a nurse practitioner who specialized in trauma recovery. She had been following Jessica's case through professional journals focused on family abuse dynamics. Sarah understood the long-term psychological effects of systematic manipulation in ways that helped me recognize my own healing process. Our relationship developed slowly, built on the foundation of shared professional interests and genuine respect, rather than the desperate need for validation that had characterized my earlier attempts at connection. Sarah helped me understand that surviving family betrayal didn't make me fundamentally damaged. It had taught me to distinguish between people who genuinely cared and those who manipulated for personal gain. We were planning our engagement party when the final piece of Jessica's story emerged through Nathan's continued cooperation with federal investigators. Jessica hadn't developed her manipulation techniques through natural talent alone. She had been studying psychology textbooks and criminal case studies for years, deliberately learning how to exploit human emotional vulnerabilities. Her laptop contained folders of research about family dynamics, elder abuse tactics, and psychological manipulation strategies. She had treated our family relationships like a laboratory, where she could perfect techniques she later used on paying victims. Every cruel comment, every calculated emotional attack, every instance of turning family members against each other had been practice for her criminal career. The revelation was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Jessica's cruelty hadn't been spontaneous sibling rivalry or personality conflict. It had been deliberate preparation for systematic criminal exploitation. Understanding this helped me finally release the guilt I had carried about our dysfunctional relationship. I hadn't failed as a brother. I had been the victim of someone who had chosen to become a predator. Standing in Harold's garden on the anniversary of his death, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from surviving family betrayal. I had learned that love without accountability wasn't love at all, but enabling that allowed harm to continue unchecked. I had discovered that setting boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary for protecting both yourself and the people you genuinely cared about. Most importantly, I had come to understand that healing required both justice for perpetrators and support for survivors. Jessica's imprisonment provided legal consequences for her crimes, but my recovery required building new relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and control. The Foundation continued Harold's work of protecting vulnerable people, but it also served as proof that good could emerge from even the most painful experiences. Every family we helped avoid Jessica's tactics honored Harold's memory and justified the suffering we had endured to expose her crimes. Sarah joined me in the garden as evening settled over the landscape Harold had tended for decades. Together we watched stars appear in the darkening sky, each point of light representing hope for families still struggling with manipulation and abuse. "Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you hadn't discovered Jessica's theft?" Sarah asked. I considered the question carefully. If I hadn't found those financial discrepancies, Jessica would have continued her systematic exploitation until Harold's death. She would have inherited everything, used her newfound wealth to expand her criminal network, and potentially destroyed dozens more families. "I think Harold would have found another way to expose her eventually," I said, finally. "People like Jessica can't maintain their masks forever." Truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Sarah smiled at the echo of Dr. Harrison's words from that difficult day in the hospital when everything began to unravel. Your grandfather was proud of you for trying to do the right thing even when it cost you everything. We sat in comfortable silence listening to the gentle sounds of Harold's garden settling into night. Crickets chirped among the sunflower stalks. Wind chimed through the leaves of the oak tree where Harold had hung a swing for grandchildren to enjoy. The oxygen tube incident that nearly killed me had ultimately saved my life by exposing Jessica's true nature and freeing me from psychological prison. I could breathe freely now, both literally and metaphorically, surrounded by people who valued honesty over convenience and support over manipulation. Jessica's cruelty had taught me to recognize genuine love when it finally appeared. Her betrayal had prepared me to appreciate relationships built on mutual respect rather than emotional exploitation. In the strangest way possible, surviving her systematic abuse had given me the tools to build the healthy family I had always wanted but never experienced. As Sarah and I walked back toward the house Harold had left me, I understood that justice wasn't just about punishment for wrongdoing. It was about creating space for healing growth and the possibility of relationships based on truth rather than manipulation. The garden would bloom again next spring, as it had for decades before Harold's death, and would for decades after his memory faded. Life continued, seasons changed, and people learned to distinguish between love that healed and control that destroyed. Sometimes the truth did surface when you least expected it, bringing justice that transformed pain into wisdom and betrayal into strength. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone close to you betrayed your trust in a way that fundamentally changed your perspective on family relationships? The psychological impact of systematic manipulation by people we're supposed to trust can be devastating, but it can also teach us valuable lessons about recognizing genuine care versus emotional exploitation. If you've faced similar challenges with toxic family dynamics, or if you have insights about rebuilding relationships after betrayal, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help other viewers who are struggling with similar situations. If this story resonated with you and you'd like to hear more accounts of surviving family manipulation and finding healing, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more powerful, true stories. Sharing this content helps spread awareness about the realities of psychological abuse and the importance of supporting survivors in their journey toward recovery. Thank you for listening to this difficult but ultimately hopeful story about the power of truth to overcome even the most sophisticated manipulation. I hope Harold's example of courage in the face of betrayal and Tucker's journey from victim to survivor inspires you to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right in your own relationships. Remember that healing is possible, justice can prevail, and sometimes the worst experiences in our lives prepare us to recognize and appreciate the genuine love that comes afterward.